All right. Since I'm a small channel, you always have a big axe to grind. And again, this is not about trying to take a lot of shots at YouTube, but trying to do the things that I really feel I need to vent on. And that is a lot of the larger channels and people I see who essentially keep on putting up their thumbnails and putting content out. I always say the same thing for the little guy. Why you are destined to fail, 12 settings to essentially correct your viewership, why you should actually post in a certain kind of way, and then some people that actually show essentially their earnings, show they have 4 channels, which power to you, you have 4 channels, your villa you're living in, the freedom you have, and I always say strongly, I always like putting in the 10 top reasons why I don't like top channels. The first one, number one, the first reason I don't like top channels is because a lot of times top channels tend to talk about essentially all the settings they have. You always have someone who comes out and they'll say essentially, here's the 10 top things that you need to set to make more viewers. It never seems to give you any type of content essentially about what about when you connect to people. If you're using essentially analytics to essentially determine the highs and lows of people on analytics, I still say you're not connecting with your audience in the proper way. Number two, that might sound crazy. Number two, essentially, I say when I look at a larger channels seem to be like living in, I call, city. I prefer living in the country. There's too much of like big posts with a lot of congestion when you start to look at a lot of larger channels that seem to be like a corporate mind. I always like looking at people that come across in that way, as in technicians, statistical type technicians, as someone who looks only at content, only upon the algorithm itself, looking at people and only looking at that content in that way. That's why I say many times over, I can identify more closely with individual smaller people. And when people suggest services, for example, like this is the way to talk to people on a microphone, this is the way to set up equipment. As anyone who's working on a small channel, it isn't always about analytics. It's more about how do you reach your people, and then can you suggest something, and then when you suggest it, just give your best opinion on what you're giving. Do not look down on the people who follow you. I'm not sure where I'm at with the numbers. Number four, possibly. Subscribers don't mean anything, really. They really don't. A lot of times people says, have a lot of subscribers. Subscribers don't really pay attention to your content. Subscribers essentially are nice to have in a sense. It's like having a number, and you say, okay, I only got, what, I got 8 now, I think. I can have 20. I can have 50. And I love the people who look at a channel like this one and say, okay, that's cool. But the problem with a lot of things within Ask Subscribers is those people are a numeric number, but essentially who is viewing your content is something entirely different. Number five, I guess it's number five. Number five reason why I really don't care for large channels is because a lot of times when you look at the content, they keep on referring to the same thing. It's always about YouTube. Always when I look at people on the analytics side, whenever I look at anything about YouTube, anything, you'll get the same thing. You'll get the large channels and everyone seems to be on the same thing. Again, you get into something that is always about numbers. Grow your channel. Grow it this way. Put in essentially someone picking up something in such a way when you look at the content, again, you start wondering about anything about that kind of content. And again, when you get into essentially looking at numbers, when people break down their channels and put down a lot of different numbers, they break down the chapters. The problem with the chapters is that you always seem to get into something. Of the top 10 things they suggest, there's probably about 3 things that hit home and about 7 things that miss terribly. I lost my number count. So forget the number count. So anyway, when I'm looking at a lot of content that comes from people that are doing YouTube in such a way, I always say strongly that for people to get into, for example, a format and say, hello guys, I always say strongly, for me personally, I always feel uncomfortable when someone says, hello people, hello guys. I always say strongly, I rather talk to people like they're strangers as opposed to assuming that I know the person who they are. Larger channels always seem to come across in a lot of ways when they see other people in such a way on a smaller basis, on a smaller scale, like I'm looking up to you. And the answer is no, I'm not. A lot of times doing this channel, I'm calling myself an X channel because in many ways over, I'm trying to force analytics to move in a different direction. Try to make things in such a way when you do content, make it content that is in real time. Don't try to focus so much on editing. Do not look at always on the thumbnail. And you have to look, I try hashtags and they do work. I'm surprised, they do work. So when I look at some things here, what works best for you as a content creator, you have to look closely at number one, content you feel strongly about, or number two, numbers. Somewhere in the middle is about where you should be. If you're only looking at larger channels and all you see is them, I always say strongly, the best thing about being a smaller channel like mine, I'm not interested in numbers entirely. I'm more interested in trying to make a difference within YouTube's algorithm. There's times I look at this and I feel frustrated because constantly I'm looking at people and they start talking about their analytics, all their suggestions and top 10 reasons, all the top 10 settings, 20 ways that small channels have it wrong. No, I like saying 20 reasons why top channels, they have it wrong because they're not allowing their own smaller channels to exist. If you have, 98% are destined to fail, there's one thing to point out. Not everyone who's posting on YouTube are trying to make money. Some people post because they want to post. They want to share with friends and family. And are you saying that they don't matter? I'd rather be a small channel. I'd rather be around people who want to follow something. And I like to have people at least listen to an opinion. They don't have to agree with it. And I really don't have all the suggestions on the planet. But I do know one thing. Top channels, they need to start understanding one thing. Smaller channels have the right to exist in some other way. They don't have to follow your recipe. They don't have to listen to all your advice. And they don't have to listen to, because you have top 10, I say you need to pay attention to all the smaller channels. And you don't have to analyze smaller channels. Let other channels exist in some other way. If you do, you may find yourself, you might be learning from other smaller channels. And maybe the algorithm changes in such a way where your channel becomes obsolete.